Judson Board of Trustees is hereby called to order at 5:12 p.m. I'm very pleased that you've taken time to join us this evening. In compliance with the State Government Code on open meetings, tonight's agenda has been appropriately posted. We have established a quorum, and I will call roll. We'll start with Ms. Eaton. Ms. King.
Tanya King, present.
Ms. Canoyer.
Suzanne Canoyer, present.
Mr. Macias.
Present.
Ms. Rodriguez.
Jennifer Rodriguez, present.
Mr. Diaz.
Rafael Diaz here.
Renee Pichelle, present. And to my immediate right is our facilitator, Patricia, and Dr. Jeanette Ball, Superintendent of Schools. Okay, Patricia. We're ready.
All right. All right. Good evening.
Good evening.
Good to see all of you again on our journey here. We're going to do a little bit of review. We're going to look at our preliminary goals, and we're going to talk about how we can measure progress on those. We're also going to try and talk about targets, annual targets. And then we're going to see where we get to, and if we if we have enough time, we're going to talk about kind of the values, the other side of this equation as well for board work. But we'll go ahead and start with our one-word check-in, just to see where everybody is tonight. Who would like to go first? All right.
I feel very productive today.
All right.
My word is productive because I'll have a very productive day.
Excellent. All right.
Hopefully it continues.
There you go. I hope so too.
I feel confident.
Confident. All right. Trustee Macias.
We're ready.
You're ready? Yes?
Ready was my word also.
All right. Excellent. Yes.
Excited.
Okay. Excited? We're over on this side of the room. How are you feeling? Okay. Trustee King?
I'm ready.
Ready? Trustee?
Prepared.
Prepared. All right. Good. Oh, I like that. Okay. So hopefully everybody brought their data packets back. If not,
I can make copies.
We
So
can
let
make
me know how many copies we need. Who needs it? Nobody?
does everybody have them?
Okay.
I'll follow along. I'm fine.
Did you bring your green folder this evening? No, I should this evening.
Okay, no problem. I'll do some right now.
I'm going to share with Miss King.
Okay.
She loves me.
Okay.
So you can have
And we probably need the comparison charts that I gave them and this data. This one and this one, probably, or the one and that. Okay. So on our journey for student, I don't think I gave you the most updated one. So let's first of all, and I gave you a sheet of paper too, let's first of all just review where we were on our board goals. Let's just see where we were and then remind each other what our preliminary board goals were. So this was our first one that you guys came up with. And we can review these. These are preliminary goals, so they're not, in cement yet. So we said that our district aspiration that was in the strategic plan is 100% of Judson ISD students will meet or exceed grade level expectations and be college, career, or military ready. And so these goals fall under that and give us a little more tangibility, and they're 5-year goals, right? So we want them to be student outcome goals, right? And what is a measure of what a student outcome goal is? What did we decide that was what we were trying to do? What are we measuring with our student outcome goals? What students know and can do, right? That's the definition of a student outcome goal. So and it needs to have kind of 4 components, right? It needs to have a baseline. So I've put in baselines in here. They may not be perfect, so we might have to fine tune those, but those are based on the latest data. And what we have to determine tonight is what is feasible, what is a stretch target for those goals, right? So the why. So that's something we're going to talk about. We're going to look at our data. We're going to see what is the progress we've made in the past and how can that be measurable for the future, right? So we're going to have those conversations both in small groups and as a group. And then we put in a deadline. So we already have a deadline and we have a population. So in this particular preliminary goal, the percent of third grade students that scores meets grade level or above on STAR reading will increase from 36%, which is where it is right now, to our target by June 2026. And then each of these goals, as we discussed, will be disaggregated by all our student populations who have 25 or more students. Okay? Make sense? I also put some things under these goals that were important to you guys that you brought up in the last meeting. So you guys talked about closing the gap, and what does that look like? And so we have to kind of think about that, because closing the gap is really like a comparative, right? We're going to close the gap between this group of students compared to that group of students over a similar time frame. So how we want to set that can either be done in a couple different ways. We can have an overall closure. We can move that into what we call our value statements, or we can have a gap goal for each of these goals. So it would be we would look at our targets and we'd say, if we reach this target by Y, it will close the gap across those populations. And so we can look at it that way too as a combination. So it's really up to you. I also put in here some of the district strategies. So in the strategic plan, there's some strategies in here that are already in place. And so how do we align with those? And in that case, what we're really looking at is our progress measures. So we're going to talk about progress measures on all of these goals. And how do we align them to the inputs that are already in place in the strategic plan? And remember, when we talked about inputs, those are the strategies, the tactics that the superintendent and her team are putting in place in order to get to these goals. And so how do we have kind of those output measurements, those interim measurements, right? So the STAR target, annual target, is a summative target, right? It's once a year we hit it. So we don't want to wait till the end of the ball game, right? We don't want to wait till the end of the year and say, oh, those strategies we deployed didn't work. You guys want, as board members, to be seeing that interim data at every board meeting, so you know that, hey, these things are working. So that's kind of some of the things. And there were two specific outputs that are in the strategic plan. One is universal screener, Dr. Ball. I saw that in there for individual student growth, which you do 3 times a year. So that could be an example of how we would measure progress. And then also RTI data might be a way of not only measuring progress on this goal, but I assume also kind of looking at that gap, right? So this one also meets the standards of HB3, third grade reading. So how are we, you guys, this still feel good to you, this goal? Okay, any questions on this goal so far? Okay, good. So preliminary goal 2 is very similar to the first one, only we're measuring math. So numeracy at third grade level at 22%. These are 2020 numbers. And so, of course, I just want to, I want all of us to recognize that those were measurements during a pandemic. Not all children were tested, right? And so those scores may feel different than the traditional scores from 18, 19, right? So it's just important to recognize that's across Texas. That's not unique to Judson ISD. And also, but if we're going to set 5-year goals, we're going to have to recover. We're going to have to recover, and that's what these, so we've got to recognize, we've got to acknowledge the fact that our kids lost some ground. So how do we make that up? Same exact, you guys mentioned about the achievement gap, how do we close that? And there are also these same measurements in this. Any questions about the numeracy goal? Still feel okay? Still feel like a valid, important measure? Okay, also meets HB3. The third one is the percentage of graduates that meet the criteria for CCMR will increase from 50%, which is also a 2020 number, to Y percent. So where are we going to have our target by June 2026? There are also some achievement gaps by race and ethnicity and socioeconomic status that we can measure within that. These 3 things that you guys mentioned were things that you brought up that were important to you. Now, so we might be able to roll those up as progress measures to this goal. So I didn't want to take them off the table for you. They could all be outcomes. They could all be student outcomes. The challenge with the persistency, although Trustee Diaz, I did find some measurements around persistence and completion of post-secondary. So we could bring that in. But that data is something that I think is important for the board to recognize, because you certainly want all your students to be successful in post-secondary. But it is not influenceable by the superintendent, because there's so many other factors, right, when they go to college that we would have to factor in. But I just wanted you to wanted to let you guys know that we can find that data. Actually, I did a little research. Don't know how accurate it is, and it's only going to be for Texas public schools, so college, post-secondary. But it might be interesting data to bring into the boardroom. Middle school math was something that you guys talked about that was important, and we said that, and I think Dr. Ball, you talked about as well that was an indicator of post-secondary success. And so we could bring that in and see how our kids are doing. And Trustee Eaton, you were concerned because you were seeing those scores kind of drop in the middle school area. And so that also might be a place where you can monitor that progress as well, so that you can make sure that we're deploying the tactics and the strategies, or that the superintendent is, to get us there, to keep us moving forward. Any questions about this one? Does this sound right? Okay. And goal number 4, which is, now this one can be a little tricky, so we're going to talk a little bit about this, but the percentage of students at low performing, and we're talking about those as D or F rated campuses, who meet or exceed standard on STAR, will increase from 18% to Y by June 2026. Now that 18% is only on 3 campuses. That's what I count. Okay, so just want to make sure that I have the right data. So there's 32 campuses total, correct? Correct. 2 F-rated campuses, 1 D, and 17 Cs. And then the rest are A's and B's. So for this one, as it can live in your board goals as long as it's tied to student performance. As long as it's tied to student performance. Because remember, our goals are what students know and can do. If you take that kind of individual STAR data out of that goal and start to talk about progress, making progress, and moving those, so moving them from a F to a D, or a D to a C, or a C to a B, then I would recommend that we move that into the values. because now we're talking about campus progress, not student progress. Still affects children, still affects students, but do you see the nuance there a little bit? Does that make any sense to y'all? Progress, we're going to have to look and really talk with Dr. Ball and her team around the goal progress measures on this, because if we leave them in the goal area, then we need to be able to track student level data. And what does it mean? What do we have to do? And that's going to be, I assume, different depending if it's an elementary campus, if it's right. I think there's 2 middle schools and 1 elementary, okay.
Remind me what the DNF campuses are. Kirby, Bedford, and Castlewood. Which one is the D? Candlewood.
And so I think there is also, in a district that is, like Judson ISD, you don't have a ton of these low-performing campuses. Now, of course, I'm sure you don't want any low-performing campuses, and
Well, just for clarity, that rating was 2019?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
It was
so,
before the COVID.
yeah.
Before.
yeah, they didn't rate them for 20.
During.
We're pretty sure that if things would have been normal, then specifically Kirby, we really think that they would have gotten out. And the reason we think that is because all the progress measures that we had before that spring break happened, that we never came back from.
So one of the things that you might consider is, I don't know if 2020, if some of those C's slipped backwards. So that makes me think that maybe we ought to talk about C's as well.
Right, because we had, most of our school district was very low in their participation rate because they mostly all stayed virtual. So then, when the test happened, they did not come in
Right.
to take the exam. So we had a very low participation rate. So that alone
Right.
was one of the factors.
So this is a goal that we could, we could set some targets around. We want to set a 5-year target, but we need to really evaluate it in those annual targets, right? Because we don't really know where those campuses are right now. We don't know. So we might have more D's than we think we do. Does that make sense? So I'm just putting it out there because we really need to look at that, and that's why I put the C's in. Yes, ma'am.
And one of the things that we didn't have, none of the schools had, is the growth measure. So it's not, you really couldn't calculate it because you need that growth measure
Right.
component to see.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And this goal is really based on that growth measure. So it's a super important component, whereas the other ones are proficiency level. So this one we're going to have to do a little more work with, and we're going to have to be able to see that kind of growth data, Dr. Ball, when we bring in the progress measures.
I have a couple of questions about
Okay.
this one. So, number one, where does the 18% come from? Is that like just on the reading star? Is that like...
It's all star tests.
Okay, so there's like we can pull a composite meet
Test taken, yeah, I think it was on here.
on the taper report?
Mhm.
Okay.
It was,
It was on the report that used to be the TPR, the taper report.
right.
Okay. And then I think the thing that's giving me a little bit of pause on this, I love the spirit behind this, and I'm only picking it apart because I'm like, how would we measure this over time? Because what if they pull out, are we only counting the DNF campuses that are DNF campuses now? What if somebody slips down? There's movement each year on which
Right.
campuses would be included in that bucket, and so I'm just curious about that.
Right. So we could switch this. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry.
No.
So could this one actually be tweaked every year depending on the rating?
It can be. Well, it depends if it's tweaked forward or backwards, right? It has to always be tweaked forward if you are going to move. Otherwise, it's a 5-year goal. You don't want your goalpost moving, right? So what we can do is adjust the targets, the annual targets, but keep the 5-year goal. And that 5-year goal may be that, you know, we have obviously we have 0, right? We don't have any D or F rated campuses. And the challenge there to me is then, are we saying we're okay with C's? Or do we want to constantly be showing growth, right? That's why I think this, the second way that this is presented, the guardrail, which is about making progress, and we could even say not D and F, but we can even say all campuses are making progress based on accountability scores and closing the gap, and we would look at their numbers, and we'd have to just do a little bit more work on that goal. If that's the case, that goes to my original statement. That stops being at the student level and starts to be at the campus level, which is great. We just move that into a value statement, which we're going to address probably tomorrow. So we just shift that, which would also give you room for another goal if you wanted one.
Thank you.
Does that make sense? Any other questions? Great question. Making sense? Clear as mud? All right. And then on 5, this was something that you've already invested a lot of resources in. So we wanted to definitely be able to measure this, which is the percentage of entering kindergartens. And I don't have a baseline on this, so I'll need your help to get that, Dr. Ball. But the percentage of entering kindergarten students will be school ready on a multi-dimensional assessment by June 2026, and X is the current percentage. So this is a growth goal as well. So does it make sense? You have a question?
X is the current percentage, so I'm trying to figure out what that would be, because like this is the first year we do the 3-year-olds. Last year's the first year we did 4-year-olds. So what data do I use for the current percentage?
The 4-year-olds, because
They're entering
2
kindergarten.
End of year.
Well, a whole year.
End of year for 4th grade and beginning of year for kinder?
End of year for pre-K 4.
So last year's end of year pre-K 4?
Mm-hmm. Would be yes, that would be your baseline. So if it was 50% of kids entering kindergarten in 2021 are ready, right? And you may use circle data, there's several different, but somehow you've got to assess, and you probably already are.
Right, so the Y is really going to be this year's DOY, the beginning of the year, right?
That's our
Y
goal.
is going to be the goal. X would be end of year DOY.
It's going to improve from X to Y. The thing is, if we only use our pre-K data, then we're not looking at any kids that didn't come through pre-K. And do they need to be part of the goal as well?
Well,
Or where are we looking at what we want our measures to be?
Well, you need to have, I'm sorry, I think I misspoke. X is the BOY, beginning of the year. So beginning of year, do you test your kindergartens beginning of the year? So that would take in anybody came through anything. You can differentiate between those, and you should, right? Like
would
you
make
in
more
your goal
sense.
progress measures, you might want to see PK3 success, PK4, the percentage of PK3 who were kindergarten ready.
Compared to those who did not
Right.
attend.
Exactly.
Compared to those who did 3 and 4.
Right.
Or 4 only. Yeah.
Right. Is it working?
Yeah.
Is it working? Is that strategy working?
That's the
Now,
comparison.
kind of just should we change that word from multidimensional to say academic, or should we talk about the multidimensional as to what would be the other pieces of data that the board would want me to look at.
I think what multidimensional assessment is referring to is the assessment we're using it's whatever that Texas something is that.
But I guess I
Yeah.
took multidimensional, like, is their behavior better, is their attendance better, like, looking at different measures of assessment is what.
Is that what's meant by that, Patricia?
No, it's because kinder readiness is measured by, I pulled up the presentation from our board meeting on whenever that was, August 19th or something. There's rapid vocabulary, phonological awareness, math, letter sound, correspondence, story retell, science, social studies, social emotional behaviors, early writing skills. So that's a multidimensional assessment, but it's all assessed in that one thing. I forget what, it's not circle, it's the one that Texas,
Yeah, the kinder
on the
ready.
adoption list for EC.
But it's still all in the area of academics, right?
No, there's social emotional behaviors, positive social behaviors, speech production.
Oh, so that's the presentation Ceci did, that's what you're looking at?
Yes.
Got it.
And the baseline, the end of year for pre-K 4 was 70% were on track,
Okay.
which was a aggregate of the multidimensional assessment.
And it was an end of year?
At the end of the year last year.
70% on track for pre-K 4 for last year.
So it's a great question, right? Like, what kind of progress do you want to see, does the board want to see, based on your investment in this strategy? That's what we're talking about, right? So if you're investing in this strategy, in a kindergarten-ready strategy through pre-K 3 and pre-K 4, a multidimensional would say, do you feel like it's important to also understand the non-academic intangibles of readiness, right? And that is a question for you, Dr. Ball, meaning, do your programs address those? So if they address them, then to me then it could be a progress measure, but I like the fact that it's a composite score, if possible. But you'll have to, so remembering that these goals are owned by the boards, right? But the progress measures are yours and your team. So you have to help us through and say, look, for the strategies we deploy, these are the progress measures that are predictive of these goals. And that's what the board members need to see, because they want to know that whatever they've resourced is meeting the needs of kids, right? Does it make sense?
Patricia?
Yes,
There were 2 points. One that Ms. Miller brought up that could be a dual strategy, and I certainly would like to know what the retention rate is for our investment in pre-K 3, pre-K 4, in terms of what is moving up, to identify why we are losing students. Naturally, when we discussed this whole initiative, that was part of the rationale, that we have an opportunity to retain students. So for me, that's a measure that I think we should evaluate. But the more pressing question is academic focused. I would like to know the proficiency of a 3rd grade student. And so, because that's an important benchmark in terms of assessing student success. So kindergarten's great. We would expect exposure in pre-K would allow a kindergartner to be ready or more ready than one that did not. But where the rubber meets the road is 3rd grade. So I would like to see assessment based on those students who came up from pre-K 3, 4, until we get to the 3rd grade assessments to truly evaluate the success of that program as we build it up.
Okay. So what I think you're saying, and you correct me if I didn't hear this right, is you would like to see a progress measure of kindergarten, of that program for this 3rd grade goal. Maybe 3rd grade math and 3rd grade reading.
At least let's talk about it. And
Okay.
see, I want to know if that's viable,
A
rational.
piece of data we could look
Yeah.
at
Right.
That would be
to
measured.
see if,
Right, so extracting from all the 3rd graders, just
The ones
were
that-
with us
That
Yeah.
went through the, yeah,
on
yeah.
program.
As a progress measure on
Yeah.
this goal.
Would the 3 and 4 year, I'm sorry, my math is.
It's a while before we get to that.
Yeah.
Right, well, I'm just saying, would today's pre-K students be in 3rd grade by 2026? They should be, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That would be the first.
The group now will be in 3rd grade.
Right. And the progress measure can look like a kindergarten readiness standard, and you disaggregate it by those who attended pre-K and those who did not. And there still is one progress measure for this particular goal. Because you could also say it's, the challenge with that is a proficiency number that will only be measured one time a year. So you kind of have to think, now, if you wanted to use the beginning of the year, middle of the year, end of the year data for kindergarten, that could be here too, and you could still say, this is where, these are kids who came through a pre-K, these are kids who did not. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So you could still have that, just like you could have a 1st grade assessment that says, you know what, in 1st grade our kids are here. And you could also do that beginning of the year, middle of the year, end of
That's
year.
just separating that data out. It's something we already collect. It's just identifying that
Right.
population.
It's just making sure that when we think about that data, those progress measures, is that those are predictive of the goal. And usually interim assessments are the better set of data to use that are predictive to these goals, because they're kind of they're a holistic instructional measurement.
And the 2022, 21, 22 class for pre-K3 would be then the 26, 27, so it would be a year after. If we looked at just this pre-K3 class, so as we keep going, that would be 6 years.
Right, we would just extend that, right? Yes, ma'am.
Having the interim checks like that helps to maintain the sustainability, so that if the kids start slipping, you can catch it and then make adjustments to your instruction or however you deliver the information, so that they can stay on track to continue the upward mobility.
Right.
That's where I think the data we were looking at the other day, that if that were in place at that time, we could probably identify better where those 6th graders, I know they do brain dumps over the summer, but once you get them back on track, where are they starting to kind of diminish, so that they can just get a little tweak.
Right, exactly. And that's why you want to measure that progress. You guys want to measure that progress so you know, not because we're trying to do anything other than say, okay, what else do you need to get there? Like if we're not on our targets, right? If we're not, we kind of have a green, a yellow, and a red. If we're green, we're golden, right? Not to use too many colors, right? But if we're green, then we don't, strategies are working, tactics are working, we're moving towards the goal. If it's yellow, we might want to have a little bit of a conversation, right, in the boardroom with the superintendent. If it's red, something may not be working. And it could be that there could be a very viable explanation, there could be a resourcing issue, there could be, a pandemic. There's lots of things that could come up. But then we need to have a conversation in the boardroom about that with the superintendent, so that we don't get too far down the path and go, oh, now we can't fix it. Now we can't address it. So that's exactly right, Trustee Eaton, what we're trying to do. So, how are we feeling about that kindergarten goal? Still feels good? It still feels like an important? All right. So let's just talk a little bit. I pulled up your guys' last one, because there was one other goal on here that we had. Sorry, I had to squish these up to get them in my suitcase. that you guys wanted to talk about that we didn't address. We are kind of addressing it in CCR, which was something that Trustee Eaton brought up. And I think maybe Trustee Kanoy or this group over here, I think I remember, was talking about 5th grade reading and specifically thinking about special needs, special ed, and what does that look like. So if we were to move this goal into the guardrail, then we have, I said you could have 3 to 5. You don't have to name another goal, but I think it might be something that I'm going to pair you guys up again with your groups and just talk about it. Was there one other thing that isn't in this list that is important to you? You've looked at the data. You can pull your data back up if you want, but I just want you to have enough time to kind of process these and talk a little bit about that with each other. So if you could just get together. I'm sorry. Okay.
If that helps.
Yeah, sure. So how maybe you 3 can get together?
Is that the same one?
Yeah. Borrow down one.
Yeah.
Use that for now. You don't have to go to the park.
If you'll just get together and just decide.
That Rose is a keeper.
If you need, you need another one. Is there something else that's important to you that isn't in this list that you are seeing, you saw in the data, and maybe you've now had time to process that data and a little time to think about it? So just something.
Patricia, I was thinking that since we have put these GPMs, these important GPMs for the board, where we're looking at achievement gap by race, ethnicity, and socioeconomic status, we could also insert special programs into that, and that would cover special ed, gifted and talented, any of those, bilingual ESL, all those things that are really important to us.
Right.
And we wouldn't need necessarily a separate goal, depending on what you guys think.
Yeah, no, so what you will see in this data is it will be disaggregated by every
every
student
goal that we
population,
have.
including special ed and
GT.
emergent bilinguals,
Right,
all of
exactly.
that will come out in that. So, but that's going to just show you proficiency data.
Right.
So if you want a closing of the gap goal, then we have to word it and figure it out for an outcome, which it could be like this, or we move that and say, look, we're going to close the gap for every student population, and
Make
this
it a
is
separate goal
separate.
instead of just including it in all these, or?
yes, we would make it either. These are all going to show up,
Right.
no matter what.
Right, because that's all data that we look at
Right.
for the student outcome.
This is,
Right.
if you want to have a goal that is very specific about closing the gap, we can leave this in. Or we pull it out and make it a guardrail, which means, look, part of the values that we have as a board, and we haven't started to talk about that, and so I just want to let you know that if we let this go from the goals, which is what a student knows and can do, we still have a place for it to be a part of board work. It still can be a measurable process for you as a board. It's just going to show up in another area, and we're going to talk about those as well. So I still want you to talk about an additional student outcome goal, if that's all right with you guys. Does it make sense? So can you,
Okay, so
or you can do it on your own.
in addition to the 5 that we already have established.
Well, if we were to take this one out, you would have an extra one. So thinking about that, what was important. Did you happen to see that other PDF that I put in that email with the presentation?
Yeah, it's on the, it's on the desktop.
I'm sorry?
It's on the desktop. Did you need it?
Oh, print it. Oh, I'm sorry, print it. I'm sorry. my bad. It was the one with the constraints on it.
Got it, yeah. Got it, like remediation.
Yeah, but then she, like, obviously from the student's perspective, you don't want them to.
You don't want it called that.
That's low.
Well, it would be this. Achievement gap by race, ethnicity, da-da-da-da.
That's exactly the one I was looking at.
Well, I thought that's kind of what she did, right? Each one of these, because that's a way to measure, are we getting to this, the overall third grade. So do we want to be bolder and make that a focus of a goal? Rather than a progress measure on these other goals. It gives it a different level of importance, I think.
These are the ones from our transition.
But if there's something else that we need to focus on, we could still have that as something we're looking at. It just isn't a separate goal by itself.
Well, let me ask you something. I guess I made the assumption that, special needs programs would also be embedded in.
They are.
Oh, okay.
That's where I'm kind of torn. One of our subpopulations that historically has underperformed is our special ed population. And so that's kind of what I was talking about in the group up there last week, was do we need specifically to look at our special ed population and what we're doing? Are we on the right
So,
track? You know, we've had
I'm
these
just
audits.
saying that this goal
There's a
could be
lot of
moved
information
out
there
of
that we can use to
and
support
into another
a
place, which
separate
gives
special
you an
ed goal.
additional goal if you wanted one.
Oh, yeah.
And as I
So
think
if
about
you
it,
saw
you
a
know,
trend in the data that was important to you that wasn't
is
reflected in these
special ed
goals,
by itself?
let's lift it up now.
I don't know.
That's kind of hard to do by
Yeah.
itself because you have so many of those students that they're in inclusive class.
Sure,
So, you know, they're standing out during the day, going.
sure, but we still have data on them.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
And it could be tracked by students in inclusion. I mean, that's a way to break down the gap. Students who are in inclusion, students who are in resource, students who are in an alternative setting, like our autistic units and,
And I think that if you look at the results, well, two of our
Yeah.
campuses are middle schools because, and we have way fewer middle
well,
schools
that
than
means,
we have
you know, we got a little bit of gap.
But
I'll
if
get
you look at the middle
conversations
schools,
we want to have.
there's like a big decline between
Oh, yeah. It is, and that gives us information there that
So
we
if
know
you
that
go,
we're
like,
focusing
if
on
you
as a
say
result of that
approaches
audit
reading is 86
and the
in fifth grade, and then
suggestions
58 in
and
sixth.
things there. So,
I can't tell you, it goes back up a little bit.
yeah,
In
Dr. Ball
seventh,
had a really long presentation, Dr. Toppin.
and is almost back up to fifth grade levels by eighth
Oh,
grade.
yeah, and it was in our program.
So you guys have these, I don't know if you remember, if
Yeah.
you brought them again, but they have the samples, there might be some ideas too in there, not to say that you have to take these, but they might jog your memory. You have those still. So anything bubbling up?
Passing rate, maybe?
Give you just a few more minutes to chat about that.
Because you can make more than you use with zeros, but not pass. If that makes sense? Because if you were really looking for
Track your productivity with these grade levels in your district. North, south, oh, you
I think I'm now having
They probably have different goals based on opportunity, but
Well, maybe. But honestly, I'm down.
they haven't gone through this process where they have a goal that can have data to track, right? No. that's a hard goal to write, because how do you track that down? Well, this pandemic has just been,
I don't see any middle school youth here.
There's like a writing. These are not grade specific, which is interesting.
And you're sure that that's past May?
And we can ask.
Teacher?
Patricia, when you have a second, no, sorry, drink your water, like,
Teacher? What is PSR? What is PSR?
That is the, I don't think we do that in Texas, actually. And I can't think of it, but these I pulled from a national deal, so we don't have that.
Okay. Got it.
But we do have,
Because we were looking for something either middle school or like grade agnostic.
well, for reading growth or from any growth.
I don't think
just
so.
in general, yeah, because we don't have any goals around middle school, and like, this, two of our rated campuses right now are middle school, and so that might get behind the spirit of the goal, to have a middle school goal.
Well, and that could be a middle school math goal, which you guys had mentioned. Instead of being a progress measure, we make it a goal. And this can be measured through MAP data. If you don't have MAP, there's some kind of a universal screener that they have to be using in middle school. So I'll ask. So that's the responsibility of the progress measure lies on them.
Yeah.
So you guys don't have to worry.
Got it.
They got fine ones.
Yeah.
So if math is important, we'll find a progress measure for you.
The first time we rotated back from Germany, my middle daughter, it was her first time.
Our seventh grade math scores are terrible.
And she just came home and she's like, Mom, they're all stupid. And she said, "Why stupid?" And I'm like, what? You know,
So MAP is another kind of assessment. We don't have it in
she was
judgment.
doing work.
We don't use it. We have to pay it for it. I think we maybe have another universal screener. A universal screener is like basically a standardized test that you administer to every student, but maybe a multiple times throughout the year.
Well, I don't even know just about their caring, if it's, you know,
Yeah, I'm trying
if
like,
you're working day to day, just to bring home
so like, something that's given us regular, just those,
So SAISD uses MAP as a nationally normed assessment rather than a state assessment. MAP. It's, and so, so Nathaniel takes it at the beginning of the year, the middle of the year, and the end of the year.
and a lot of those parents are afraid to come to school.
And so I get a score on it that shows how we've been kind of 99th percentile students.
Because they pushed it in the homes, it was expected. I think, and I know I can't repeat it, because I don't remember
because an adult
exactly how you
is
said it.
two international.
The just on what you were saying, and this is going
Process.
is,
And it's given, students go into the program, you give it, identify deficiencies, have sets your
the
game plan.
average,
And then for federal reporting purposes, you give it 60 hours.
they don't think that.
They'll give you the growth points.
Yeah,
Okay, fine. Same thing?
Just like,
Okay.
yeah.
But, you know,
It's not necessarily tied to funding, but yeah, but it's used the same way.
There was never any expectation except that I was
go
going
to
to
college.
There was no, it's in the bus, I was going to be.
And it, like in my house, it was like if you
Yeah, that's
graduated
it.
from high school, you had to
NWEA map.
now go get a job.
So how do we change that? No, I don't have.
But you were from a little church. I thought your name was in the
Sounds familiar.
Entering minds.
Yes.
But all that has to do with the background experiences of the parents.
parents.
I don't know
All right,
much
did
about
you
it.
guys talk about a little bit together?
No.
You wanna get together and do, see what you got?
I'm looking at that same one that we were discussing, the achievement gap by race, ethnicity, and socioeconomic. There's some way or another that that can be incorporated into those subpopulations. And so what I'm trying to do is figure out how this would replace that maybe.
And it's very frustrating.
Not that one, number 4. No, number 4.
I mean, we're still seeing people say stuff like, I'm the first one in my family just to.
Okay, you guys need a few more minutes, or you feel like we can, you got some ideas? Okay. So, what did you, are you guys good, or did you need a few more minutes?
Well, we kind of bird walked, sorry. But it kind of all tied into what we were talking about.
Okay, no worries, no worries. All right. So what came up? What came up in your group conversation? Anything specific? How about you guys? What came up? Anything that you felt like that wasn't being measured, but you really think it's important for your kids?
They gave me a point of clarification, you know, that these are covering our special needs children too, so they're embedded within each of these, so we don't have to separate them out.
Right.
I just, as I just said to Ms. Canoia and Ms. King,
Turn your mic on, please, Missy. Sorry. Press that red button. There you go.
what I was just expressing to them is how frustrating, to me, it's frustrating. All 3 of these schools are in my area. And I'm just trying to understand why. Why can't these grades come up? Now, I know Candlewood was an F school, so if they're at a D now, yay.
Yeah.
But, like Ms. Canoia said, you know, socioeconomic indifferences or whatever, you know, and these kids, you know, a lot of them are not getting that same push,
Right.
you know, from home and that support and those attaboys. And now that stuff really adds up. You know, I know for myself at our church, you know, we take the time, my pastor knows just about all these kids' teachers. And his wife used to work for Judson. She was one of our nurses at the middle school, Judson Middle School. And she actually would take her time on Saturday, and they would come up to the church, and they would help them with reading and math and stuff. And some of them, that's the only help other than in school that they were receiving. You know, nobody to check homework and stuff. And I just would like to figure out how we can fix it.
Yeah. No, it's
I know that's not what you asked, but I just
With every
trying to, when you look at these, you know, and you look at the scores, or you look at what the goal that we're trying to obtain, it's all these same 3 schools.
Right.
You know, so maybe bus them to the other side of the district. I don't know, you know, because they tried the busing thing. I was a part of that. It didn't work.
Right. So, no, I think it's a really important question, and it is part of board work, right, is to say, okay, what is the struggle? What is the challenge that we're having? Why are these kids not moving as fast as we'd like them to move? What can we do? What are the strategies? And so addressing those, I think it's a good point that, you know, 2 of those are middle schools. I think you guys made a point about middle schools. We don't have a middle school goal, so what was your suggestion around a middle school goal?
When we were looking at particularly the middle school subjects, 7th grade math was a particular pain point. And not just like you know, the passing rate as compared to like previous and subsequent grades, but compared to the statewide average, we were 20 points below the state average on 7th grade math. And thinking about how, for example, Algebra 1 is like a huge gatekeeper assessment for students. Like a lot of students don't take the 8th grade math because they go straight into Algebra 1. But if they're in that bucket of kids who didn't pass, then, you know, are they really truly going to be ready? So that was, we were pretty open, I think. We were flexible, but I think living into the spirit of this goal of being F-rated campuses, we've perpetually had middle schools in that category, and then looking at what is the most need. And we don't have a math goal either.
Well, we have a third grade math.
We have a third grade math goal.
No, we do, you're right, sorry.
Right.
But nothing that addresses middle school particularly.
Right. And so that's a really good point. And, you know, a lot of times we'll have a middle school math goal that is an 8th grade math because it's an indicator. But progress measures could be something like, you know, are they taking Algebra 1, right? And who is taking Algebra 1? Who's completing Algebra 1 successfully, right? Now we're looking at, that also addresses, okay, well, we know there may be a challenge if none of the kids in those 2 middle schools are enrolling in Algebra 1, or they're not completing it successfully. Then that goal drives a strategy from the district to say, we need to address this. So I think a middle school math might get at what you're asking about, and also what y'all are asking about. Now, if you want it at 7th or you want it at 8th, that's something that we need to have that conversation about.
Shouldn't it be like before that time, so that by the time they reach 7th and 8th, they're, you know, that gap is closing, they're maintaining that interest, and they're growing on that?
My rationale
Great point.
7th versus 8th is that a lot of students take Algebra 1 in 8th grade and then end up taking the Algebra 1 test and don't take the 8th grade STAR test for math. And so in 7th grade, that's like, it can be a bellwether for either the 8th grade math or the Algebra 1 test. But the 8th grade math test, not as many kids take that, as like all the 7th graders take the 7th grade math. I don't know what the breakdown is between kids who take regular math in 8th grade versus Algebra 1 in our district is, but half the kids, say, in 8th grade would be reflected actually in the Algebra 1 statistics.
So how does that sound to you, Dr. Ball, being the expert in the room? Does a goal around 7th grade, is that a predictor of success in that 8th grade, either math or Algebra 1, which I think is what the board is concerned with? Is 7th grade math, a measurement of 7th grade math, a predictor for that success? Or is 6th grade math? I don't know.
I would, and I'm not saying yes or no yet.
Yeah.
I was thinking about using the 2 grade levels that used to be the 2 grade levels that the state would use, which was 3rd and 5th grade.
So you were thinking 5th grade math is a predictor of 8th grade success?
I'm not sure if it's so much a predictor of 8th grade algebra success, but more of a readiness for middle school.
Okay. What if we did this? And I'm asking you, and if this will be okay with the board too.
Readiness for middle school.
I'm sorry, I missed.
I'm sorry, I wanted to make sure I understood what she was saying.
Okay. What if this becomes a progress measure for this?
Yeah, because you don't look at just the 7th grade in isolation, you would look at 6th grade, 5th grade, 4th grade, because we're trying to get to that target.
continuum.
Yeah.
Right. So do you feel like 5th grade is a predictor of 7th grade success?
Yes. about 5th grade is they get multiple attempts at that test. And in 6th and 7th, they do not.
Right,
anymore.
right.
And so it seems like 5th grade can get unnecessarily inflated. And the state knows that kids have to pass that 5th grade test to move into middle school. So they sometimes, I'd be curious to know if they drop the scale score to like make it possible for more kids to pass.
Well, they're shorter tests because they drop the field tests out of them, field test items out of them. And so, you know, that having a shorter test makes the test, tends to make it easier. So,
Right.
Oh, they don't do field tests?
not on
Course.
retest.
So I think what we really have to decide, because we can get you progress measures that are predictable of your goal. You need to decide if this is your actual goal or if 8th grade math success is your actual goal. Because unless you're just positive, and that's what's going to be up for the experts, but it's also important for you guys, is if you believe that 7th grade success is a predictor of 8th grade success, then okay, we'll have a 7th grade math goal. But if you just believe 8th grade math is incredibly important, then that's what you should set your goal at. But I understand what you're saying, Trustee King, is they can go in different directions, and you don't want to have an Algebra 1 goal and a math goal.
Rodriguez.
And so you're saying success at 7th grade is better. I mean, is more indicative.
Yeah, it
Right.
covers more kids.
Okay.
I don't know that it's more of a predictor, but it covers more kids than 8th grade math would.
Okay. So let's put a pin in that one for right now. Anybody else have one? You guys were over here writing. Trustee Macias, you were writing. Did you have another goal that was important to you?
Yeah, I think my colleague, Ms. Bashar, and I worked independently on this one, so there was no collaboration on this one. But I do feel like these are going to be future goals. I get that feeling that we're kind of creating future goals, that when this training ends, we may be able to just pick that up and insert these as goals. Don't know if that's the intent, but I get that sense.
Right. They'll be 5-year goals. Right.
So, as I had stated before in earlier sessions, I love student data, but it is not the only thing that we're responsible for. So in my assessments, I'm looking at things like employee retention. I want experienced teachers in the classroom. I'm not going to see this here, but experienced teachers in the classroom will assure that we have student success. So you may consider that a guardrail, but
right.
I would consider that a primary goal. We have to find out why we're losing teachers to other districts. Is it compensation? We all know it's not all compensation, but what is it? Is it the lack of good professional development? Is it support in the classroom? Whatever that is, I think it's incumbent on the board to recognize that we have been perpetually a middle-of-the-road district, and we have personnel come in, get experience, and move on. So I think it's important that we establish some leadership and say to our superintendent, there's an objective here, and that has to be part of this conversation. It can't be excluded. So in that, trying to frame an employee retention strategy for experienced teachers 6 years plus to address Ms. Eaton's issue. We have schools that are poor performing. We all know if we get the right teachers in there that we can actually change the whole trajectory of that campus. So which means part of our strategy is right back to that employee retention, experienced teachers, incentivize those campuses and get the right
student outcome.
Right.
Absolutely, ultimately, the right outcomes. So, but that's not here.
But it will be. It will be, and I'm not, when I say it will be a part of the guardrails, it's just as important as these, right? So I promise you those will be a part, and that goal, if it's important to you, it'll be measurable.
I'll mention it every board meeting, but the thing is, you're saying we have 4 or 5 goals. We're going to establish 4 or 5 goals. None of them are going to address employee retention.
But 4 or 5 constraints,
Not directly.
guardrails
They're
will.
all indirect. And so
They will.
I need a direct goal with the idea of employee retention or teacher retention in mind. And so
We will have those.
So that is one.
Those are guardrails, and they will be in there, and they are measurable, and they have progress measures just like the goals, exactly the same.
And then our collaborations, and we talked about what I was writing here. The other part that I've actually seen, and again, back to Ms. Eaton's point, going to campuses like Candlewood, evaluating their after-school programs, and the lack of structure and missed opportunity to support children in those after-school programs in the academic sense. So finding the right partners that will focus and then be measurable. Everyone can say they do it, but what is the measurement on, are they actually helping our students prepare? And a lot of them probably need support. So those are two ideas. I haven't wrapped around what that measurability would be, but I certainly would want to look at the right partners and outcomes for those students that are participating in these after-school programs, to include the point when we see increased disciplinary issues. And most of the time, we'll see it in middle school. So what are we doing to decrease disciplinary issues and outcomes that can be a board objective to support the superintendent to get the right resources? Because I can certainly think Dr. Ball say, I don't have 100 mentors to put to a school, and that's true. She probably doesn't. So if that's going to be a board goal, if it's important to us, we need to give administration the support to get that accomplished.
Right.
But they're just not on here. I just see two different, different goals.
They will, if, I promise. They're coming. They're coming.
That's
So when we
my
can
input.
talk about that right now and come back to progress measures on each of these. After school programming, as long as it's tied to an academic outcome, can be a progress measure. So if you're talking about a third grade literacy and you want to increase it, and a strategy that Dr. Ball is deploying is out of school time, work with them, then yes, absolutely, that could be a progress measure as long as it's predictable to third grade literacy or to third grade math or to whatever one of the other goals is. So that's the important component, is if we're going to have an after-school program that is academically focused, we need to vertically align it towards those goals, because otherwise, as you said, it needs to be measured, right? It needs to be measured. The progress needs, like, are these successful partners? Are these, so if we don't align it, then it's not as easy to measure and to track it. So it's a good point.
One of the things before this pandemic stuff started and school was dismissed is that we, and I hope, I'm sure it happened, right? We train teachers over the summer that are doing after school, they're doing after school training.
We are still doing that after school training.
And I say it like that because I just wasn't sure. I couldn't remember if COVID had shut it down or not. But this, since we're doing that this year, what we're doing is there are people that trained over the summer, and they are doing work with the kids after school. We'll be able to track that this time because we'll have data to show, to see if it helps,
Right.
And I really have high hopes, I really have high hopes.
Yeah.
And it's math and reading, right?
So that's a great.
That we train our teachers.
Adventure Club. Yep. At
So-
every campus that has Adventure Club.
A great strategy, aligned with a goal, and we're going to measure progress. Like, is it a successful strategy?
Boys and Girls Club, right?
So, yes, exactly. So, any other
We're already doing that.
outcome goals, student outcome goals? Did you have one that you wanted to add in here that you
Well-
wanted to think about?
I just wanted, my concern was still with special ed, and I was looking at the one that talked about race, ethnicity, the achievement gap. Closing the achievement gap by race, ethnicity, and socioeconomic status is what I wanted to be able to incorporate that in the special ed goal.
A specific, what's the percentage of students that are special ed?
I think it's between 10 to 13%.
Okay. So you would like a goal that is specific to that, or do you feel like that is addressed through the targets. Because all of those targets will have annual, like, we showed you, let me see if I have it. I think I have that slide. Okay, so, well, it's really hard to read, isn't it? It's in there. There. See how all of that, all of those student populations
Yes.
have annual targets. So we'll be looking at that data as an annual target. So is that enough, or do you want, and it's okay, it's up to you guys. You get to decide this if you want a specific goal on special ed. And if so, what do you want to close? Where do you want our special ed kids to be able to know and do? I know, it's really hard, isn't it? Sorry. There, is that better? No, that's bad too.
Put a goal percentage on them, because there's such a vast difference in their needs. Some of them have more mental, physical challenges than others. Some is mental. You know what I'm talking
Right.
about. So if we just can, that we probably won't get them on a grade level, because some of them just aren't capable. But to at least be able, from the beginning of the school year to the end, to see marked
Progress, okay?
I mean, I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
And I think the column that says SE, that's just to the left of FSE, is pink.
20%?
That's special education.
Yeah, it is.
Right.
It's trying to grow it by 10% over the 5 years. So the baseline is 20. So I think that takes into account what you're saying,
Okay.
Ms. Eaton, right? Because yeah, we're not trying to get to 100%, right? But we are trying to take the kids who are capable of doing more and getting them to a passing standard.
And I had a follow-up about the data that keeps coming to my mind. That is that in 2010, I did campaign on the premise that more of our students needed to take the SAT. And during that time, even back then, I was hearing, we teach the test, which of course, we're talking all about STAR and how to evaluate.
In this particular goal, yeah.
And so it always seemed that way. So I always mentioned back then, if there was a test to teach to, it should be the SAT. So fast forward, we've done a lot to try to involve that process, even getting them at no cost to students. So if we look at the state of Texas, we're ranked 28 overall in the nation, which means these measurements will probably only get us so far. So the question I'm having is if we should be thinking more aggressively to help this district be a top-tier district to compete with the top 10 states. And I bet you their success, if we look at that, and I'm only guessing because I haven't looked, would be SAT test as part of success. Now, obviously, that's not the only measure, but it's certainly one that would enable us to distinguish ourselves. And so I love this data, but if we get immersed in it like we are now, I mean, it's only going to get us to a certain point anyway. And our thing has obviously been to produce excellence. Excellence means better than anyone. So I just wanted to put that out there for thought, because that's been running through my mind recently.
So that's a great point. SAT could be it could be a student outcome goal, right? It's a whole different level. It's not really included in the college readiness. Well, it is.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah,
It is, right?
That's part of our number 3.
Right,
isn't it?
so it is part of that.
Progress measures there.
And so you can have a progress measure with a goal. So then you have to decide, is it how many kids take the SAT? How many kids score X on the SAT? So we could have that, but that's striving for excellence. So when we say,
That's the stretch.
right, which is exactly,
But we should always work towards the stretch anyway, right?
yes,
That's the whole
yes,
thing.
right. So we can have that be a goal progress measure underneath the college and career readiness goal. Because if there's a minimum college readiness standard, and then there could be an excellence, right? Another college readiness standard that is for Judson ISD school students, right? And that is, I think, what you're saying, right? Trustee Bas?
I am.
All right, so that could be covered in the college readiness. Any other things that are bubbling up? It's dark in here. Okay, all right. So what we're going to do now is we're going to get some food, so everybody has some nourishment, take a break, and then we're going to go to that other side of the equation before we go to progress measures. Okay? Well, no, reverse that. I'm going to talk a little bit about progress measures, and you're going to, just so we can give guidance to our superintendent, because we talked a lot about them, and I want to capture them all your thoughts. And then we're going to the other side of the equation, which is those value statements that are a lot of what Trustee Macias and a couple of other, you guys have talked about, social and emotional. We've talked about equity. We've talked about those are value statements that are still as important in this district is how we're going to get there, right? So, okay, thanks. Oh, I'm sorry. What do y'all want for your break? 5, 10, 15 minutes? 15? Okay.
You need to announce it, I think, Renee. That we're going on a 15-minute break.
Time is 6:30. We're going to have a 15-minute break.